Hey everybody, it's Ed Zoller, Villa Realty Group. When teachers come by homes, I'm going to give you this market update for March 1st. I just pulled in all the data and finished this up. I'm going to try to keep this very short. Last video was 30 minutes long, and I did hear people say they'd rather just upload the link to the PDF, read it for themselves. I'm going to make these videos shorter, so you can check out all my videos and the PowerPoint and PDFs that you can just look on your computer as well by going to LeeCountyMarketUpdate.com. I got it on the bottom of the screen here. So let's go forward with the third market update for this year. So again, going to keep this really short and brief, and I'm probably just going to stick to the data. But February was interesting because this was supposed to be a good month for our quote season, and I'm going to bring that name a lot. Season goes from January to May. January, we start seeing an uptick in buyer demand. February, it upticks more. March is always the peak, and that's the busiest month. So this month we're in right now. Then April, it starts sloughing off, but still high buyer demand. And by May, we're done for the rest of the year, and that's when our inventory should start going up again. So let's go over what this start of our season did, and we'll go on to the first slide, which is, of course, how many homes we have for sale. You can see a very sharp increase, 6% in the month of February. This is a month that we should normally see inventory starting to slow up and not speeding up. And we have hit 9,800 homes now for sale in Lee County. We are second only to Charlotte County, leading the state in 1 year inventory growth year over year at 102%. But actually in the country, we are the seventh fastest in the country. It's not a good thing for you sellers out there, but good news for buyers in that we are getting quite a bit of inventory. And compared to the country, Lee County is number 7. Obviously, Charlotte County is not only leading us in the state, but they are also leading the country with a 149% increase year over year. So that is a sign that we should have prices going down when inventory grows that much. Or that we'll have a lot more choices, and competition is going to force sellers to make their house stand out by dropping the price. We're going to get to the demands. Here we do see, as we were expecting, February an uptick in demand, but I do want you to look at the long-term average where we should be selling about 1,900 homes a month over the course of the year on the average. This should be one of our more popular ones, and as you can see in previous February's, way over that graph, especially in 2021, 2022. But as you see that slope I'm trying to highlight in the graph, that these peaks are starting to just get slower and slower, meaning that our seasons are becoming more and more of a bust, as opposed to this normal market where we have this huge increase in demand in the month of February. So we did have an increase, and that is a good sign. So buyers did come out of the woodworks. They were jumping over their fences to grab their homes, and they're seeing these price decreases that we're having in our market as a sign that they can buy a home for significantly lower than, let's say, if they bought a home last year. But we are still 30% lower than normal for the month of February. March, as you can tell from every one of these graphs, that is our peak. And so I'll be interested to see if we even hit long-term average, because the trend of that slope is further going down and down. The reason why, of course, is affordability. Are we affordable? Yes or no? And this graph really highlights that. You can see in the beginning of the graph, 2005 and 6, we were not affordable. 46% of Lee County's average household income, that's not one person working, that's two, had to spend 46% of their gross income to even to afford a home. That's not sustainable. Obviously, we had our crash in 2012 for the housing market, 2013, 14, and 15. Look how flat that line is from 13 on all the way to really 2022. But then look at what happened to that graph as it got exponentially bigger. A lot of that had to do with interest rates, but also had to do with our price increases in 2022 that just made houses more and more less affordable. I should be saying that differently. But you can see the trend. We are heading back down. Last month we were at 41%. This month we're down to 40%. But long-term average should be at 26%. So I know I did math last market update, but I'll assume you did not see any of that. But to update the numbers as we change monthly, our household income did go from 73,000 to 74,000. So people in Lee County's houses are making $1,000 more a year than they did even last month. But we can set the numbers to say that of $74,038, if we are at that 26% of gross income being an affordable house, and that really tells you that that is a sustainable thing, then we should be seeing mortgage payments of $1,604. Now, how do we get there? Price reductions, interest rates, making more money. Those are really the three big key data points I really look at to say, are we affordable or not? But let's talk about home prices because I'm going to get to that number. But remember that number, $1,604 a month is what people in Lee County can afford. Our prices did go down, not as much as they did last month, negative 0.2%. But normally, we never see any negative price decreases at all since really the 06, 07 crash. We've always seen a 3 or 6% annual increase of home prices, and now we are yet again another month that our home prices have dropped, just as predicted last month with that data. It didn't drop as much as what people would want, and there is a reason for that. But everyone's been asking me, how do you determine a buyer's or seller's market? Prices are down, great, more inventory to choose from. Sounds like a buyer's market to me. There's actually a graph that can answer that question, so I made it on the next slide. Our definition of what I always called a buyer's or seller's market is if no other seller hit the market, none. From this point forward, how many months of inventory do we have? If it's 3.9 months, that's almost 120 days of inventory should no other house hit the market. Buyers at the current rate of this increase, pending sales and increased demand we would have 3.9 months would be kind of a stable, whether it's a buyer's or seller's market. But if it goes over that number, 3.9 months worth of inventory, then most people would call that a buyer's market. And obviously we hit inventory less than that, then that would be a seller's market. Or we would hear people talk about how there's not a lot of things for sale. So looking at this right now, we are at over 7 months of inventory, by far into that buyer's market category. Whereas you can tell from May 2020 all the way until really July of 2023, it was a seller's market. We hit a low that in 2 weeks' time, we would have no inventory if everyone didn't go on the market. But of course, people are going on the market. So this kind of, I keep track of this to kind of tell people when was a good time to buy, a good time to sell. Obviously, you want to go into the peak, but you'd have to go back all the way to 2018 to see the last time we ever hit more than 8. And now we're almost 9 months, according to this graph, of a buyer's and a seller's market. That's a lot of inventory, and we keep gaining inventory. 6% increase from last month. Who knows what March has in store? But if this gets even worse and goes up to the 12, 13, we have a whole year's of inventory. Then you're going to see a lot of competition, and that's going to force a lot of price drops to happen. That's just evidence that we're going to have more and more price reductions the further that peak goes up. So we will go back to the $1,604, updating all these numbers. The new average sale price of $393, that's down $1,000 from last month. The new interest rates, which as of when I wrote this, have gone up a quarter point. They were at 6.2, now they're at 6.5. Pretty much makes our monthly payment $29.88 a month for the average home. That's for principal, interest, tax, insurance. Last month when I did these numbers, it was $29.08. So actually, houses became less affordable in the month of February than they were even in January. That's kind of a step in the wrong direction. We need to be getting back towards that 1,600. So the only ways to do that, if we only dropped interest rates, I'd have to make interest rates 0. So anyone that tells you, oh, interest rates, Feds are going to drop interest rates and it's going to cause things to pick back up, they'd have to drop to 0. Just for making $393 even work to make it $1,600 a month. Obviously, that's not going to happen. If we only drop price, we'd have to lose about 200 plus $1,000 on that average price, making our average price $200,000, a 50% reduction in price. Or what's probably going to be more realistic is that interest rates will drop to 5, maybe 4. But I've been talking to says it's probably going to expect it to hover and stabilize around 5%, which means our pricings are still going to go down about $100 something thousand, almost $200,000, making our base price of our home 243, and then we would be sustainable. So again, this pinpoints towards price decreases. I wanted to pinpoint one thing about when our housing market stabilized, and I'm going to bring this up again in the next slides. This graph really tells me everything I need to know about our local real estate market, our home value growth. How much is our market growing in price point, or is it declining? And you can tell here that back in the boom, obviously we were going up into high numbers, 28, 29, 30% increases year over year. But then obviously we crashed. You can even, those little tiny dots are every single month. About, I would say, middle to or late early 2007, it crossed over that 0% threshold, and it didn't get back to stabilized until 2012. And that's important. Right now, our market lost another 0.2%. Last month, we were at 0.5%. That's not as much, but you remember that uptick of demand in February, even though it was lower, it did make it get back to more almost a stable type of market. But we'll have to see what March has in store for us, because that should be the pinnacle of everything we're waiting for season. But keynote to remember, 2012, early 2012, January, our market finally stabilized back to 0, and it started increasing from there for the next 9 years. So keep remember of that, is 2012 is when our housing market stabilized. So to predict the future, what we can look at is the rental market of last time, the housing market last time. If we know that we stabilized in 2012, when did rent stabilize? Maybe we can use the rental graphs and the rental figures. A lot of you are renting out there wondering if rents are going down or up, and that's what we're going to go over next. But I think this is a way of predicting the future of when our housing market should finally stabilize. When is this madness going to end? When are we going to start seeing a normal growth of market? Oops, I just cruised past that. Okay, so our rental market. And I highlighted a couple things when our housing market stabilized. But more importantly, when did rent stabilize after it went up during the last crash? So we stabilized in 2010, the rent market. So if we look at this market and say when rent finally does stabilize, then in this case, 2 years later is when our housing market stabilized. Maybe it follows the same exact recipe. Maybe it's a little quicker, could take a little longer. But let's just assume that history repeats itself exactly. That when rent stabilizes, then 2 years later, the housing market stabilizes. So rent did go down. Went from reached a peak in 22.85 on the average, and is currently at 21.91. It is down 1%, where last month it went down 0.8%, and 1% monthly is 12% annually. We are about 20% overvalued compared to what people can afford. But I really want you to take a look at this graph of how much it really climbed from 2016 to 2021, but a nice even steady slope, and then the absolute ridiculousness that it went up from $1,500 during COVID to $2,200, but is now falling. Why? Affordability again. And that's just what this talks about. We know that people can afford a little less than a third of their gross income in rent. And again, we take that new number, that 28.9%, the 74,000 we talked about that the average person makes in Lee County, means that rent should be 1783, but it's not. It's at 2191, and that's 20% higher. So this kind of uses a couple different data points to say, hey, if we're dropping 1% or 2% per month, then it should take 12 to, let's say, 12 months or longer, 12 to 18 months, for rent to finally get back to 1,700. And when that happens and we see it stabilize, then 2 years later, our housing market will stabilize, and that should give us close to what we should bottom out at. Okay, so when people ask me, is it a buyer's seller's market, or should I buy or rent? And I did this last month, this graph, but I really want to highlight this here. I took the two graphs of affordability of housing, and I took the graph of affordability of rent, and I kind of plugged in those numbers and made those graphs crisscross. And look at what happened. They crisscrossed in 2008, where if the red line is above it, and that's housing market, and the rent is blue line, if the red line is above the blue line, then it's not a good time to buy a home. And it was from 2005 to 2008, it was not a good time to buy a home. And anyone who did probably lost a lot of money or went into foreclosure or short sale. And then that's when we kind of started. Our market stabilized in 2012, where you see the market, the graph, the red graph kept going down, 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 and then it popped back up. And we looked at the last graph, looking at totally different data points, that 2012 was the start of the correction of the bottom of our real estate housing market. So then it started going back up, and then it was slow and steady. We did have a blip in 2018. I've always talked about that 2018 blip where things became a little less affordable for people. But then they immediately changed their mind, dropped the interest rate, and then things got affordable again. But as you can tell here, for our updated graph, that they crisscrossed in 2022, and is not a good idea to buy a home. You're better to rent, but again, rent is about 20% higher than it should be. So is it a good time to rent? Either. This is what I've called always a transition market, a transition year where the answer to every question is really no. Is it a good time to buy? No. Is it a good time to rent? No. It doesn't make sense for people. But I always take a look at this because it starts making this market seem make sense of it. So our February market update, the middle of our season, we saw an increase in demand, closed sales, but very short of what we were expecting in February for a normal market. And of course, we're not a normal market. It did pick up, but it was definitely not a February for the records. Supply went up 6%. That should have been going down or starting to really slow up. So that is concerning. In perspective, last time our inventory from January to February, it grows about 2%, so we're about 3 times that normal levels. But last month, we were gaining 7 times the normal levels for the amount of homes that we gained in January. Demand did increase 43%. That's a good sign. But normally we gain 20% February in demand. So it's demand in February. So we had a little uptick. Again, not as nearly what we thought it was going to be, but an uptick is good. But the problem is we have an abnormal amount of inventory for this month, and it looks like it's growing still. Home values did drop again. And the reason being, of course, is there's still over 40% of your gross income going to a house. People can't afford that. At least the top 50% of the wage earners, the bottom 50%, half the people in the county cannot afford a home at this point. So that's something that we're still going to be looking at, those trends. And I did do a new graph with the months of inventory to let you know whether buyers or sellers market. And I'm going to be updating that graph as well. So again, I kind of recapped what I talked about, and you guys can read this. This does make our 7th consecutive months of negative growth. Last time we crashed, we had 59 consecutive months of negative growth. So hopefully this doesn't continue all the way to that time, but it does show another month of negative growth as far as price point goes. So comparing month to month, obviously you see that total sales of homes for sale went up. Our inventory went up. It shouldn't have gone up. It should have not have gone up as much as it did. Our solds did go up. So again, the uptick, and the pendings, as you can tell, went up. But look at the amount of pendings in January, which was 1,600, and how many actually sold in March. And that's about as long as it takes. When a house goes pending, it tends to close 30 to 40 days later, and it's not nearly up to that 1,600. And what that discrepancy is called the back on the market curse. A house goes off the market, and the buyer changes their mind. Their financing falls through. It doesn't appraise. There's inspection issues, and the house goes back on the market. And you'll see those on Zillow, Trulia, Homes.com, the portals that you guys have of the houses coming back on. And we have quite a bit of that going on. New construction inventory just went down, but not by a lot. They're still building homes. They're still coming out with them. But 1,600 out of 9,800, or 19% of our total inventory being new homes. New builders are going to get the most distressed in this market, and they're going to offer the best incentives that owners and typical people cannot offer. So they're always going to be more motivated of a seller than, let's say, people that just own a home that's used. Our time on the market went up by 3 days. Our median asking price went down quite a bit, 30 grand or so, and our selling price, but our median selling price went up back to 390 or so. Still, percentage of asking price, when you see an asking price right now, this number is slowly ticking down. We were at 94.6, now we're at 94.37. And you'd say, oh, that's not a big deal. Well, 1% of 300 grand is 3 grand. So overall, this all shows signs that we're trying to stabilize, but we're just not cutting the mark on this. That it's taking longer to sell a home. We have more and more inventory, more and more competition coming on the market. And so for you sellers out there, just know that you're not going to be the only townhome or the only home, maybe even on your street, that's for sale, that's like you. And remember, you still have a big percentage of homes from builders who are going to be more distressed than you and be able to offer incentives more than what you can do. So is it too late? And I've said this 3 months straight now. No, you gained a lot of fake equity in your house, homeowners out there. Tons of fake equity, couple hundred grand of fake equity. And if it's going to lose 50, 60, 80, 90,000 of that fake equity, it's still a lot more than if you bought before 2020. If you guys bought after 2020 or 2021, hopefully you bought your home that you're going to be living in. And in 6, 7 years from now, it's not going to make a difference what you paid because the market's going to correct itself. You're going to be paying more towards your principal reductions. You're going to owe less on the home, and you've still enjoyed your home this entire time. For buyers out there, again, I think your time is getting ready. Yes, it says we're in a buyer's market. Does that mean you should be buying? You need to know the facts and figures so you can make an educated, informed decision about your home real estate buying process. And I think that's what this market update is trying to do, is to give you that evidence. Believe me, no buyer is going to be able to predict the actual bottom. I can't even say when our market crashed last year until now, 6, 7 months later, to say, oh, definitively, look at this cross, look at these graphs, look at how this changed abruptly. But in the month that you're in, you're not going to know that you're in a bottom or something like that. When it becomes a house that you can afford and the monthly payment makes sense, a couple things I will talk about, because I don't go over it here in the PowerPoint, is the reason some of these figures may not make sense, where I said I'll bring it up later, where prices tend to have not gone down as much as we would expect with this low demand and this high supply and this growing inventory. Well, that's because these builders, instead of dropping their prices like they did 15, 16 years ago and causing a market to crash price-wise, what they're doing is offering more incentives. They're offering interest rates that don't exist. So for you buyers out there, I am looking every single day, at every week, of every builder and what incentives they're offering. There's a builder giving $80,000 with an incentive. They're taking some off the price, but they would much rather spend $30,000, $40,000 giving you an interest rate that you could never get to make the monthly payment what you can afford. Remember, you qualify on a monthly payment. So it's not all about price to them. They're figuring, instead of dropping 40 grand off the price, they'll just spend 40 grand to buy down the rate. And you can buy down the rate a lot. If it's 6.5%, could we get 4? Could we get 4.25 to make the monthly payment that of as if they dropped 70, 80, 90, $100,000 off the price? It only cost them 40. So this is what I think is keeping the prices high. But obviously, with the time on market going up and our inventory going up and staying stagnant and a lot of these pendings going back to actives, that explains kind of what this process is. Obviously, the data I get from is all of these. You can feel free to look at every single piece of data I get, and it's going to come from one of these websites here. Again, love your feedback on this. Recently, I did help some couple out in North Dakota, and a person wanted me to look up their neighborhood in California. I got right in the middle of California zip code I'd never heard of before. So I was able to give that kind of the same update to them, but local for their market. So if you have a need to know about a certain market, whether it being in Pennsylvania or being in Jersey or Michigan, do know when markets change, not every city does it at the same rate. There is what I've called the train. And if there are leading cities, which is Austin and Dallas and Boise and parts of Nashville, Tennessee, and obviously Florida, a lot of major cities in Florida are in the front of the train, there are still people in the caboose of the train that are still showing price increases, like in Jersey, like in parts of upstate New York, which are showing a like crazy sellers market and not a lot of inventory, and their prices are still going up. And if you're watching this from one of those states going like, this must just be a Florida thing. No, it's the train, and you're just in the caboose. And this is exactly what happened last time. Cape Coral, Fort Myers was like the engine of the train. We crashed. We were the fastest growing and the fastest crashing. We were up the mountain first, and we were down the mountain fastest. And then everyone else followed after that. And there's going to be some cities, if you're watching from those cities, didn't really do anything during COVID. They didn't really go up that much. They didn't really go down that much. Buffalo, New York, I'm talking to you, where it didn't happen last time either. They didn't really have a boom. So they didn't have anything to lose. They just stayed consistent and steady. Again, if you guys need me for anything, my number, 239-980-2792. My email, ed@villarealty.com. I have 2 websites up there. Obviously, you know I help out teachers buying homes. I'm not updating that as much, but the new website is leecountymarketupdate.com. I love to hear from you guys soon. I'm going to be uploading all the PDFs and these videos to that website as well. So if you ever want to look at the end of the year, January's, February's, or now this one, March 1st, market updates, they'll all be there. I'm going to make it a little more user friendly. Right now it's just links, but you can take a look at the PowerPoint and PDF and read it yourself. Since my video, I'm just trying to keep a little shorter. I don't know how I did, but hopefully you guys are all doing well. Please I look forward to give me a call, and please don't ever think you're bothering me, because answering your questions and staying in connect with you is what I do. Talk to you later.